built by blood and fueled by vengeance. This is the greatest car to ever come out of Ford Motor. The Ford GT40. We all know the story, right? Ford wants to buy Ferrari, the deal goes right to the very end, they're about to sign it. Ferrari huffs and puffs and says, hey, I want control of my racing business. Ford says, no way. And that means the deal is dead, in a very insulting manner, no less. Which means Ford needs to get to work on designing a new sports car. And after much debate, they ended up going with Lola to design it because they had experience with Ford's V8 engines. And as an American engineer, they had to send a representative to help work with Lola. And they chose the only man for the job, Roy Lunn. Why was he the only man for the job? Because he was the only person at Ford who had experience with mid-engine cars, since he worked on the Mustang 1. And in just 10 months, Lola and Roy designed the GT40 Mark I, powered by a Ford Fairlane 289 V8. It stood just 40 inches tall, hence the name, and it was incredibly fast, reaching speeds of almost 200 miles an hour. Unfortunately, when it entered Le Mans in 1964, it broke down or crashed. And when it entered Le Mans again in 1965, it broke down or crashed. And when it wasn't breaking down or crashing, it was terrifying to drive because the aerodynamics were so bad that it got wheel spin on the straights at 170 miles an hour. Yikes. So, Ford turned to the only American manufacturer who had won at Le Mans, Shelby. Carroll Shelby put Ken Miles and Phil Remington in charge of the new project. And they redesigned everything. They threw out that puny 289, put in a massive 427 V8 from a Ford Galaxy NASCAR. Then they went to work on the suspension, retuning that. Then they tweaked the aerodynamics, and by tweaked I mean redid the entire system, because they found out using tape and string that they were losing up to 75 horsepower from lack of airflow into the engine alone. That's losing an entire car worth of horsepower just because of airflow. And their biggest innovation was not the engine, was not the airflow, it was the brakes, specifically the braking system. You see, the Le Mans straight, the Moulin straight, has a very big braking zone at the end of it, which absolutely shreds the brakes. They decided, instead of making the brakes more reliable in the long run, they would just develop a system to easily change the brakes out. And this, sure, it cost them a few extra minutes on a pit stop, but over the course of a 24-hour race, this revolutionary feature proved to be decisive in letting the GT success. And since it weighed just 2,200 pounds, the 485 horsepower engine could propel that little rocket ship to over 210 miles an hour. Alright? That's some serious speed. And it was off to a serious start. The designer, Ken Miles, was actually one of the drivers for the Shelby team when racing against Holden Moody's GT40s. And Miles won the 24 Hours of Daytona outright. Then, just a few weeks later, he won the 12 Hours of Sebring outright. And then, in June of 1966, the big one, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And in qualifying, Ford locked out the first 4 rows against Ferrari. And unlike 1964 and 1965, they didn't break down. Well, not all of them did. Half of them did. 5 of them, to be exact. But that's better than the Ferraris because every single Ferrari broke down or crashed trying to catch Ken Miles' GT40, who broke the lap record 3 times. Yeah. He was flying. And then, just as Ford was about to claim the single greatest victory in the history of Le Mans, they did have to throw some political controversy into it by slowing down Ken Miles by 10 seconds a lap so they could have their photo 1, 2, 3 finish. Which is a fantastic photo, but it also cost Ken Miles the victory and gave it to Bruce McLaren. So, you know. Yeah. But, political controversy aside, caused by some idiot executive, this was the first win outright for America in the history of the Le Mans race, and the only 1, 2, 3 finish in the history of Le Mans before or since for an American manufacturer, securing the GT40 as one of the most legendary cars of all time. But it wasn't really all American, you see. The chassis was from Lola, a British company. That wasn't gonna do. So, Ken Miles and Phil Remington went back to work and started developing the J car, as it was known as. They basically took the chassis, threw it out, and designed their own chassis around the 427 engine. And it also was revolutionary because it utilized a honeycomb aluminum chassis to save weight. Sadly, the J car was not to last very long, because just 2 months after Le Mans, Ken Miles died in a tragic accident at Riverside International Speedway testing the J car. But that death was not in vain for several reasons, because the GT40 Mark IV was developed from the ashes of that fiery wreck. First off, they added a new roll cage, which, yes, it cost it 600 pounds, but it arguably saved Mario Andretti's life at Le Mans when he crashed at 120 miles an hour. And speaking of speed, the Mark IV could top the Mark II significantly. What? Significantly. With a top speed of 220 miles an hour in 1967. Was a naturally aspirated car. Yeah, that's fast. And it was fast enough to propel Dan Gurney to another outright Le Mans victory for Ford in 1967. And then Ford decided they weren't going to race anymore. Because they had beaten Ferrari, they didn't need to prove anything else, so why race anymore? Which means the GT40 should be done at Le Mans, right? Wrong! Because somehow privateer teams were able to tame the deadly Mark I from 64 and 65 and somehow make it win Le Mans in 1968. And then somehow win Le Mans again in 1969. So, good job, guys! I don't know how you did that, but there you go. And there was actually going to be a successor to the GT40 called the Ford P68, designed with Group 6 in mind, and it featured, again, revolutionary, crazy aerodynamics. Unfortunately, it didn't have much success, and then rule changes stopped it from being competitive. So, that was the end of the GT40, if you will, but that didn't stop some experimentation with it. You see, there were a few interesting ones, shall we say, most notable being the Mark III, because if you notice, you skipped Marks 1, Marks 2, and Mark IV, you skipped 3, right? Wrong, because the Mark III is there. It's actually a road-legal production version of the GT40. They only made 7 of them, with a detuned 4.7-liter V8. And it had such luxuries as softer shocks and an ashtray. Yeah. But it never went anywhere, and it never got really off the concept stage, which is why they only made 7 of them. The more bizarre usage of a GT40 was the Transit Supervan. Yeah, they took a van body and threw it on the chassis of a GT40 Mark I, and used it as a publicity stunt for the Transit. Yeah. There were a few prototypes throughout the coming years, like the GT70 and the GT90, but those didn't really go anywhere. Until 2004, when the Ford GT prototype came out, and this time it actually made it to production. It featured a mid-engine, 5.7 liter, supercharged V8 making 550 horsepower. And it had powerful 4-piston Brembo brakes on all 4 corners because it needed a lot of weight to stop. Okay? 3,600 pounds to be exact to stop it. But that big old engine was able to propel that big old weight to a top speed of 205 miles an hour and a standing quarter mile in 11.8 seconds. But this wasn't really a successor to the GT40. It was more a homage, and it was a good homage. It was very popular. I really like the look of it. It's a very good tribute to the GT40 look and aesthetic. But it wasn't very successful, if you will. It wasn't designed to be a racing car. It was just designed to be a tribute to a racing car, which means its one entry in GT1 wasn't very successful. It did enter at Le Mans, but it was never very good. Interestingly, it was very good at drag racing. For instance, a 2,500 horsepower version of that 5.7 liter V8, yeah, it could do 300.4 miles an hour. 300.4 miles an hour in a standing mile. In a mile. But it would take another 12 years until we would get a true successor to the GT40. In 2016, Ford unveiled the GT. Now, this looks radically different than any other car Ford has ever made, with its massive air intakes on the side, its active aerodynamics, its adjustable suspension, its 3.5 liter twin turbocharged V6. It was nothing like Ford had ever made before. And here's why. Because Ford didn't really make it. It was made in secret by their Le Mans program. You see, they actually started a Le Mans program way back in 2013, where Ford ordered them to make a Mustang competitive in the GTLM class, for some reason. And quickly they realized that wasn't gonna work, obviously. So they designed a brand new sports car without approval at all, and then presented it to their boss and say, hey, we got a race car for you now. And it worked, and they made the GT. So this was a true car designed from the ground up to race, unlike the GT from 04. But it didn't start out very good, just like the older GTs. You see, on its debut race in the 2016 24 Hours of Sebring, literally everything that could go wrong, it did go wrong. For instance, the transmission broke. Then it spun out. And then while they were changing a tire, they cut a brake line like idiots. And they were absolutely humiliated. Which means that no one was expecting them to do well in their debut year in the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 2016, competing in the GTLM class. Despite that, both the 68 and the 66 locked out the front row for the GTLM class in 2016. And over the next 24 hours, they would continually battle with the number 82 Ferrari until eventually, it was 4 hours left to go, they would go for the overtake and hold it for the last 4 hours, winning the 2016 24 Hours of Le Mans in the GTLM class 50 years to the day after they won 66. And if that is not a proper tribute, I don't know what is. Now, because of finicky regulations and the fact they nerfed the car, shall we say, they were no longer competitive at Le Mans after that. Well, they were competitive that second, third, and third, but they never won. But they did win the IMSA Championship over here in the States in 2018 after a fierce battle with Corvette. So, there's that. And just like the GT40 that came before it, the Ford GT Le Mans car would compete for 4 years from 2016 to 2019 before it eventually retired from endurance racing altogether. And to give it a proper retirement gift, Ford gave it quite a send-off with the GT Mark II unveiled in July of 2019. This is basically a GTLM race car, completely deregulated, so it has no limit on power, no limit on weight or brake size or tire size or downforce. It was the ultimate GTLM car. That had never been done before. It had been done with Porsche in the 919 Evo, but never with a GT car. And that means 700 horsepower, not road legal, racing monster, costing $1.2 million, if not for the faint of hearts. And there's only 45 of them, so even if you have the money, you're probably not going to get one. But what you get is an absolute monster, an incredible power-weight ratio. Again, that's 700 horsepower, just 3,100 pounds with the carbon fiber bits. Now, it does have bigger brakes, which are heavier, but it gets you stopped better. Of course, it's unlikely you'll need to stop very much because it produces 400% more downforce than the road car. 400%! And it pulls 2G in the corners. 2G is absurd for any car, much less a Ford. The GT40 is America at its absolute peak, working on a single objective: crush Ferrari at Le Mans. We've done it twice. Ford's brought the GT back 3 times. And now with their obsessive, stupid devotion to SUVs, we may need the GT more than ever.